Hello, welcome to the Constitution Study. I'm Paul Engel, and we are here to read and study the Constitution so that we can return it to its rightful owners, we the people. If this is the first time you've joined me, I thank you, and I want to thank whoever recommended you. I hope you'll visit the website, constitutionstudy.com, sign up for my mailing list, read some of the articles and posts, and learn more about the Constitution and the study itself. I'd also appreciate it if you would subscribe to the Constitution Study podcast at Apple Podcasts. If this is not your first time, if you've listened before and you've come back, well, I am very thankful for that, partially because it means there was enough information you were willing to come back and find out some more. It also means that you're interested. And I like the fact that people, I hope, will start being interested in the Constitution, what it says, and what it means. So today, I want to take a little detour. At least some of you will think it's a detour, and I want to talk about the Declaration of Independence. You may be wondering, well, Paul, if this is a program about the Constitution, why are you looking at the Declaration of Independence? Well, it's simple. The Constitution was not written in a vacuum. There's context behind it. The Founding Fathers had just finished fighting a war that in many ways was started, or at least declared, by the signing of the Declaration of Independence. This was a rebellion that was started by our Founding Fathers. And really the only difference between a rebellion and a revolution is who wins. We won, so it was called the Revolution. If we had lost, the British would have referred to it as a rebellion. It helps us understand the Constitution, understand why it's framed the way it is, what our Founding Fathers were thinking, what context they had, and also why our governments are formed the way they are, why we bothered declaring independence in the first place. See, if you read the document, again, I'm all about reading the document, the original documents. If you go to the show notes, I have links to transcripts of the Declaration, so you can follow along if you want. In the Declaration, it says it became necessary to dissolve the political bands, in this case with Britain. And it was necessary for these colonies to become states and assume the equal standing with other powers of the earth. In other words, colonies are subservient to the mother nation. So the colonies were subservient. They were sub-organizations of Great Britain. And it became time to dissolve that band and for them to actually stand up and become their own nations, to assume the powers that other nations like Great Britain and France and Spain had. And this was a big deal. This is a big step. So our Founding Fathers gave reasons why. They said it was right for them to give a reason why they were impelled to separate. So who actually declared independence? Again, if you read the transcript, it starts out with, quote, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. Now, if you actually go to the transcript and read it, you'll see that united is not capitalized. So we think of the United States of America as this entity, this country. It's a proper noun. United States of America is a name. But we didn't start out that way. We started out as 13 independent states. New York, Massachusetts, Virginia, they were all separate. They had their own governments, but they united together in a single cause, that cause being their own independence. And we'll talk a little bit more about why they did it as we go along, but it's important to understand a single nation didn't declare independence. 13 individual states did. They did it in unity for self-defense and self-protection, but we started out as 13 independent countries. Why? Well, probably some of the most famous words from the Constitution are, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our Founding Fathers says this was so obvious, it doesn't need to be explained why. It's just self-evident. And the self-evident truth is all men are created equal. Now, it doesn't take much research in history to see, while we may all be created equal, certainly aren't all treated equally. In the United States, we weren't any different. Slavery was a fact in the entire world, of which the United States is part. There is a lot of discussion. There's a lot of angst over the fact of slavery. And if we were to pretend it didn't exist in this nation at its founding, we'd be hypocrites. But the idea was that all men were created equal. And our founding fathers wanted to create a land where they could move towards men not only being created equally, but being treated equally. And we'll get more into that as we talk about other parts of the Constitution, like the 3/5 clause and others. But this was this goal. This was an achievement they wanted to get to, the idea that men are created equal and that they're endowed with certain unalienable rights. Now, I have a post I'm working on where we describe what are unalienable rights. I'll probably create a podcast episode where we go into the details of what is an unalienable right. Let's suffice it to say that at this point, let's agree that there are self-evident rights: the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to pursue happiness. These rights cannot be removed, they can only be infringed. So why this Declaration of Independence? See, in the Declaration, we read that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Governments are created for the purpose of protecting the rights of the citizens. Now, we focus a lot on the fact that their power is derived from the consent of the governed. It's also in there. But think about it. The purpose of a government is to secure your rights. Now, in this country, we have multiple layers of government. It is the role of the federal government to secure your rights. It's the role of the state government to secure your rights. It's the role of the county and the local government to secure your rights. And when they fail in this, it is the right and, in fact, the duty of the people to alter or abolish those government and to found a new government on what seems most likely to secure people's rights. This is the basis of what our founding fathers were, why they were declaring independence. You see, there had been a long train of abuses. In fact, if you read farther in the Declaration, you'll see there were 27 specific grievances against the Crown and Parliament. Now, we've all heard taxation without representation. That's why we declared independence. And well, okay, there is some truth in that. Like a lot of myths, there's a piece of truth in it. Taxation without our consent is one of those grievances. However, it's number 17 out of 27. It didn't even make the top 10. So what were these issues that drove our founding fathers to say the government is not protecting our rights, therefore we need to declare independence? Well, one of the biggest was an out-of-control judiciary. Judges running amok. A legal system that had been manipulated to the point where everyday American colonists could not get justice. The other was overbearing rules, regulations, and agencies. We think about the Stamp Act and the Tax Act and this act and that act, and it's basically bureaucracies creating problems for the people, not protecting their rights, but actually infringing on their rights to get what they want. In fact, one of my favorite justifications for declaring independence was, quote, "He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and to eat out their substance. Now, I don't know about you, but if I look at the federal government and I see how often they create new offices, new bureaucracies, new entities, with all sorts of officers all going out telling us how to live our lives, what we can and cannot do with our property, how we must interact with other people who we can and cannot contract with, how we must build our homes, what must be in our cars, all the while taxing us to pay for all these. And if it's not a direct tax, it certainly we see a lot of fines and fees, all taking money out of our pocket, eating out our substance to support this Leviathan in Washington that has gotten out of control. Now, our founding fathers weren't fools. They said that it is prudent that government should not be changed for, quote, light and transient reasons. You don't change governments because you don't like who got elected. A little too often I hear people talking about, oh, so-and-so got elected. They need the revolution, the resistance, all these changes because they don't like who got elected. I don't always like who gets elected. I don't always like the president. I don't always like my congressman. I don't always like my senator. That's not sufficient. They say mankind is disposed to, quote, suffer while evils are sufferable. Yeah, we're going to stick it out while things are still sufferable. But there comes a point when enough is enough and we can't take it anymore. And it's time to stand up and say, it is time to alter this government. And if things don't get better, there may come a time when there's a time when our founding fathers said it was time to abolish the government. And in fact, that's what happened. They go through and describe how they sent letters and asked for relief from Parliament, from the king, over and over and over again. And not only did these injuries continue, but in many cases they were made worse. Quoting from the Declaration, quote, the history of the present King of Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. Close quote. This is what they're talking about. The government in the form of the king had repeatedly injured them, had repeatedly taken powers that were theirs. He had established tyranny. This was the basis for declaring independence. And as you go through those 27 issues, many of them you can see in our life today. Sure, we don't have the quartering of large bodies of armed troops among us, but we do have the keeping of a standing army, and we do have the federal government refusing to assent to laws that are outside of their purview, federal judges determining what states can and cannot do, overriding the will of the people of the states based on their properly elected representatives. See, unfortunately, I see us heading more and more towards a situation that is as bad, if not worse, than what instituted the revolution, this Declaration of Independence. And part of that scares me. Not so much for me. I've been around a while. But I think about my daughter, my future grandchildren, and others who either will live in a land that's no longer free or will have to fight for the freedoms that we have given away. And the solemnity, the importance of this, to me, comes down to the closing paragraph. It says, "We therefore, the representatives of the United States in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states." See, this was serious. First of all, it's representatives. These people came together representing states. More importantly, they represented the people of those states. They were sent to this General Congress with the authority to declare independence. They had gotten permission from the state representatives. It says that they have the right and ought to be free in independent states. See, you had united colonies. These were independent colonies that had gotten together to take this action. And they're saying they have the right to have the power and, in fact, the responsibility to do all things that independent states have the right to do. They were declaring 13 new countries, 13 new sovereign and independent states, united in this declaration. Almost 2 years later, they would write what they call the Articles of Confederation, the rules by which these 13 states, these 13 independent nations would work together in this fight for their freedom. 13 states united in a desire to live free, to have our rights protected, and to hold our leaders accountable. This experiment in self-rule would lead to wars, both internal and external. There would be ups and downs. There would be changes made to our documents and to our history. There would be those who worked toward liberty and others who worked towards centralized power and control. But our rights and the expectation of our government to protect them was so important that 56 men signed proof of their rebellion, dedicating their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honors. Make no mistake, these men were signing their death warrant. This was proof positive, evidence that any court would accept that these men were rebelling against their king. Had they lost the war, they would have been tried, convicted, and hung. Benjamin Franklin said, "We must indeed all hang together, or, most assuredly, we shall all hang separately." This podcast, the associated website, everything I'm working on is dedicated to the idea that those self-evident truths are worth defending. They are worth the time and effort to read and study and understand the Constitution, to understand what our rights are, to work to protect them, to not go down a road of tyranny, but to continue to fight to be free. Our founding fathers ended this document with, quote, "And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." These men were willing to go to war to protect their rights, to suffer, potentially die, lose their homes, lose their families, lose everything to protect the right to live free, to protect these unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Are we not willing to devote a few minutes a day, maybe 30 minutes a week, to read and study the Constitution, to protect the rights these men fought and died for? And how many men and women afterwards fought as well? In the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Civil War, and other wars that we have fought internally and externally. See, that's why it drives me. They were willing to fight and die. And all I've been asked to do so far is write and speak. I hope as we go through this, you'll see the importance of understanding our Constitution and the documents that support it, the documents around it. That you'll take some time to read and study. I hope you'll go to the website, constitutionstudy.com. I hope you'll ask questions. I hope you'll leave comments. I'd love to know more about what you think as this podcast gets started. It's, I know, a little rough, but I'm working on it. It is a work of passion. It is a work of desire. And I hope you find it useful and interesting and educational. And I will look to see you again on the next episode of the Constitution study. Thank you, and God bless we the people of the United States of America.